Hello, I'm Assistant Professor Dr. Mohammed Metin Çameli from Istanbul Aydın University. Thank you for the opportunity to present my study entitled Everlasting Effects of Heavy Childhood, Paul Morel and D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. My talk today focuses upon heavy childhood of Paul Morel with the stultifying effects of the referred childhood upon his adulthood, his relationship with women in detail. In line with this purpose, I would like to start by drawing your attention to the significance of childhood in literature. Childhood in literature is very closely associated with innocence, purity. However, there is another aspect of childhood in literature as a space of emotional vulnerability and formative trauma. And this aspect of literature can be explored in modern literature. Child characters in modern literature can be said to be portrayed in connection with their experiences of repression, kind of psychic traumas. Influential novelists of the time, basically the 20th century, such as Thomas Hardy, Virginia Woolf, and H. Lawrence, can be said to have been articulating these submerged aspects of the place in their novels to a serious extent. Among them, D.H. Lawrence, with his Sons and Lovers, published in 1913, stands out because this is a sort of a novel that is very closely intertwined with the enduring emotional legacy of childhood and paralyzing complexities of family relationships. My talk today is divided into 4 different dimensions. But before that, I would like to restate the focus of my study. The focus of my study is exploring the ways in which Lawrence's work presents childhood as a phase of life that produces fragmented subjectivity that forms adult relationships on the side of Paul Morel. In line with this purpose, the 4 dimensions that I've just stated are family dynamics and emotional burden of Paul Morel, formation of complex adult subjectivity, intergenerational responsibility and emotional transmission, possibility of resistance. The first dimension of my talk, family dynamics and emotional burden of Paul Morel, revolves around the characteristics of the Morel household. The Morel household is characterized by persistent conflict between Walter Morel, the father, and Gertrude Morel, the mother. The couple is not in good terms with each other. They don't get on well at all. And Gertrude Morel is the kind of the mother who reflects her grief to her sons, especially to Paul. And the failure to succeed in a marriage with Walter, with its bad effects upon the children, is at the center of the novel. Paul's emotional world can be said to be shaped under this weight, can be said to be shaped under mother's personal expectations. For instance, if we take a quick look at this confession from the novel, taken from part 1 of Sons and Lovers, from the section titled Young Life of Paul Morel, his hatred towards his father is expressed as follows. Paul hated his father. As a boy, he had a fervent private religion. Make him stop drinking, he prayed very often. I think the ways in which Paul's hatred towards his mother is expressed in these lines endorses the view that the mother has a big influence upon him, upon his psyche, because he lives under the weight of the complexities of Gertrude Morel's life. The kind of the suffering is transferred from Gertrude to her sons. The second dimension of my talk, formation of complex adult subjectivity. This aspect of my talk centers around Paul's 2 romantic entanglements with Miriam and Clara. With Miriam, his relationship is kind of reminiscent of his relationship with his mother, Gertrude. Because when he is with Miriam, He feels that this woman tries to dominate him spiritually. Therefore, Miriam can be said to be a representative of intellectual and emotional compatibility. However, to him, Miriam also is an emblem of emotional constraints at the same time. With Clara, he's sexually free. He attempts to liberate himself from the chains of certain dogmas, certain spiritual burden of the mother. However, there are still certain things that are shadowed by certain early experiences. Namely, through the relationships with these two different women, what comes to the fore is the blurry line between inherited emotional burdens and the likelihood of developing a sense of self for Paul Morel. To exemplify, in part 2 of Songs and Lovers, in the section titled Strife and Love, the nature of the relationship between Paul and Miriam is expressed as follows. He felt that she wanted the soul out of his body and not him. All his strength, all his energy, she drew into her soul through some channel which united them. She wanted to draw all of him into her. It urged him into an intensity like madness, which fascinated him as drug taking might. So it shows that the relationship with Miriam was both nurturing and restrictive. Relationship with Clara was nurturing in terms of the sexual freedom, but also it was restrictive to a certain extent as well. This being the case, he couldn't find happiness in either of these relationships because he always feels under the weight of his mother's influence upon him, coming from his childhood. The third aspect of my talk today, intergenerational responsibility and emotional transmission. It is solely centered on, solely dependent upon the influence of the mother upon Paul Morel. Basically, I need to restate the significance of the fact that Gertrude is a kind of a woman that is imprisoned in a conjugal relationship, in an unhappy marriage that she doesn't want at all. She's entrapped in a world that induces no dwelling space for her talents. And she transfers her suffering to her sons. She lavishes all her affection on Paul and holds on to him as a kind of a substitute husband. What Paul inherits is not only love, but also his own mother's disenchantment, disappointment with life. Gertrude's influence on Paul's spiritual world becomes totally explicit in these lines. Paul was dissatisfied with himself, with everything. The deepest of his love belonged to his mother. When he felt he had hurt her or wounded his love for her, he couldn't bear it. In both of his relationships, all he thought about was his mother. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He couldn't get her out of his mind. The last aspect of my speech today, possibility of resistance. This centers around the notion that there are certain moments in the novel when we see Paul partially recognizes his entrapment, or he attempts to assert his own autonomy. He tries to construct his sense of self. But these are very limited moments. I don't think that this becomes very manifest until Gertrude Morel dies. When she dies, he feels totally free. And this desire to liberate himself from the crushing weight of his traumatic childhood is with him all throughout his life. But it can't be said that it doesn't exist at all. It exists. Paul tries hard to experience it, but it only becomes possible when Gertrude Morel dies. Aside from four different aspects of, or four different dimensions of my talk today, I would like to draw your attention to the contemporary resonance of this work. Namely, the concerns raised in Sons and Lovers still feel current today. When we think about the ways in which Lawrence portrays childhood, we can say that the 20th century novelist invites us to reoccupy our well-established notions about the stage of childhood in 21st century. We reconceptualize childhood as a stage that has to do with enduring legacies of the stage itself, emotional burden, psychological after effects, especially after effects that become manifest in adulthood. To conclude, when we focus on heavy childhood of Paul Morel in the H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, what we do is to reflect on the ways in which literature serves to reveal certain truths about the human condition, namely the profound effects of childhood experiences, and how much it is challenging, how challenging it is in Paul Morel's life. And it is really hard to try to sympathize with Paul Morel, to create a sort of an empathical bond between ourselves and Paul Morel, as his childhood was really traumatic. But it, as I have stated, it at least impels us to re to reoccupy some notions about childhood as a whole. Thank you for listening to me, and these are all my words for today. My best wishes.